Good evening, Rose Buddies. How is everyone doing in the chat this evening? I don't know why I scheduled streaming this week because I am moving to my house officially, and having the requisite number of panic attacks that we won't be packed in time. Dusty Buns, though, is being the rock. Not in a wrestling sort of way, unless you count wrestling my nerves. Woo at moving, not at panic. Yeah, I feel like one partner is allowed to freak out and then the other partner gets like really calm. So I'm also like emotionally preparing myself that once I calm down, Dusty will start to worry. But I've never really seen Dusty thrown off kilter. I know, Jess. I don't know if I'm good. No, I'm good. I'm just really excited to be in one place. We've been going back and forth the last, this whole month really, between painting, getting the house ready, and then starting to trickle boxes in. Moving your whole life is a lot of work. But it does make me feel good that as a homeowner who's bought our house, the goal is that we don't have to do this again for another, 20, 30 years. This is our place. Ooh, something went ding. Boop. Make our phone silent so it doesn't interrupt us. Who is excited to hear The Secret Life of Plants? Did I hype it enough on Twitter? Here it is. I used to have a paperback version of this book. I don't think it made it with me through several moves, in part because it's a pretty old book, published in the 70s. Let's find the exact year. Okay, well, it's published enough that this hardcover book is only $8.95. Let's see how chonky it is, which already tells me this is from earlier days. Portion of this work appeared in Harper's Magazine in 1972, but this book was published in 1973. And it contains some studies. The first experiment it talks about is from the 60s, but it's got a whole history of really cool plant news in it. Let me read the back for everybody. There's just a few bullet points. I really love the cover that has this giant plant. It could just be perspective, I suppose, but it looks like it's the size of a building and it's got a little face. I tweeted earlier the penguin cover of this book, and it's a beautiful shade of green, and it has a flower that's formed by two hands, and the hands are kind of cupped, so you can see that they're holding just so many eyeballs. That is the creepy version. Yeah, that is the Plant Overlords cover, Jess. Okay. All right, let's read the back. Plants are the only living creatures able to produce their own food. That is a bullet point. Next bullet point. Grasses are the greatest single source of wealth on Earth. Third bullet point. All flesh is grass. Even coal and petroleum are plant life of the past. And the last bullet point. Recent experiments in communication with plants indicate, as Paracelsus and Mesmer foretold, that all living things, man, plants, earth, planets, and stars are interconnected. What affects one affects them all. Ooh, Thirsty Bursty. I may need to pick that up. My campaign is very druidic, and my party likes talking to trees. I think that the chapter that we're going to read today, and I might read the following chapter, but the chapter we're going to read today is going to give you some, some inspiration for how a tree might speak, how it communicates. Simply Adoran, making sure that I hydrate before I start reading. Thank you. This is some Scientology plant stuff, isn't it? There's some really interesting stuff. Okay, so I talked about this a little bit at the end of my last stream, and I'll try not to be spoilery because we're literally about to read this book, or the first two chapters. But when I went into this book the first time, I was totally prepared for it to be just a sort of ridiculous old read that was funny in its ridiculousness. And as you read it, they talk about the steps and experiments they took for control, all the different considerations that they had. And I really started to take it seriously. And it really changed how I feel about plants in general. Note to self, Lysa didn't deny it. They just said it has some really interesting stuff. But I will let you be the judge of this as we dive into Chapter 1, Plants and ESP. When did I first read it? Goodness. It was after college, so not a decade ago, maybe like 8 years ago was the first time I read it. My partner at the time introduced me to it as one of his favorite books. And I got myself that paperback copy, which I don't think I finished talking about. That was my first copy. And because it's an older book and it was paperback, it was like literally falling apart. Every time I turned a page, that page would sort of pop out of the book. Even this book has that really great old book smell. I made sure to get a hardcover in really good condition. And I like the hardcover because if you take the book jacket off, there's this like cute mushroomy foil in the linen. I love little details like that. But this is The Secret Life of Plants by Peter Tompkins and Christopher Bird. And we're turning to page 3. Oh, it's got all these Roman numeral pages at the beginning. Okay. Chapter 1. Everyone ready for us to start? Plants and ESP. The dust-grimed window of the office buildings facing New York's Times Square reflected, as through a looking-glass, an extraordinary corner of wonderland. There was no white rabbit with waistcoat and watch chain, only an elfin-eared fellow called Baxter with a galvanometer and a houseplant called Dracanae masangina. The galvanometer was there because Cleve Baxter was America's foremost lie detector examiner. The Dracana because Baxter's secretary felt the bare office should have a touch of green. Baxter was there because of a fatal step taken in the 1960s, which radically affected his life, and may equally affect the planet. Baxter's antics with his plants, headlined in the world press, became the subject of skits, cartoons, and lampoons, but the Pandora's box which he opened for science may never again be closed. Baxter's discovery that plants appear to be sentient caused strong and varied reaction round the globe. Despite the fact that Baxter never claimed a discovery, only an uncovering of what has been known and forgotten. Wisely, he chose to avoid publicity and concentrated on establishing the absolute scientific bona fides of what has come to be known as the Baxter effect. The adventure started in 1966. Baxter had been up all night in his school for polygraph examiners, where he teaches the art of lie detection to policemen and security agents from around the world. On impulse, he decided to attach the electrodes of one of his lie detectors to the leaf of his Dracana. The Dracana is a tropical plant similar to a palm tree with large leaves and a dense cluster of small flowers. It is known as the dragon tree, Latin Draco, because of the popular myth that its resin yields dragon's blood. Baxter was curious to see if the leaf would be affected by water poured on its roots, and if so, how and how soon. As the plant thirstily sucked water up its stem, the galvanometer, to Baxter's surprise, did not indicate less resistance, as might have been expected by the greater electrical conductivity of the moister plant. The pen on the graph paper, instead trending upward, was trending downward, with a lot of sawtooth motion on the tracing. A galvanometer is that part of a polygraph lie detector which, when attached to a human being by wires through which a weak current of electricity is run, will cause a needle to move or a pen to make a tracing on a moving graph of paper in response to mental images or the slightest surges of human emotion. Thirsty Brewsty's legit taking notes? Yeah, take notes. We're all learning today. Invented at the end of the 18th century by a Viennese priest, Father Maximilian Hell, S.J., court astronomer to the Empress Maria Theresa, it was named after Luigi Galvani, the Italian physicist and physiologist who discovered animal electricity. The galvanometer is now used in conjunction with an electrical circuit called a Wheatstone bridge, in honor of the English physicist and inventor of the automatic telegraph, Sir Charles Wheatstone. In simpler terms, the bridge balances resistance so that the human body's electrical potential, or basic charge, can be measured as it fluctuates under the stimulus of thought and emotion. The standard police usage is to feed carefully structured questions to a suspect and watch for those which cause the needle to jump. Veteran examiners, such as Baxter, claim they can identify deception from the patterns produced on the graph. Baxter's dragon tree, to his amazement, was giving him a reaction very similar to that of a human being experiencing an emotional stimulus of short duration. Could the plant be displaying emotion? What happened to Baxter in the next 10 minutes was to revolutionize his life. The most effective way to trigger in a human being a reaction strong enough to make the galvanometer jump is to threaten his or her well-being. Baxter decided to do just that to the plant. He dunked a leaf of the dracena in the cup of hot coffee perennially in his hand. There was no reaction to speak of on the meter. Baxter studied the problem several minutes, then conceived a worse threat. He would burn the actual leaf to which the electrodes were attached. The instant he got the picture of a flame in his mind, and before he could move for a match, there was a dramatic change in the tracing pattern on the graph in the form of a prolonged upward sweep of the recording pen. Baxter had not moved, either toward the plant or toward the recording machine. Could the plant have been reading his mind? Yeah, I see folks already reacting. Get prepared for a lot of that reaction in this chapter. When Baxter left the room and returned with some matches, he found another sudden surge had registered on the chart, evidently caused by his determination to carry out the threat. Reluctantly, he set about burning the leaf. This time there was a lower peak of reaction on the graph. Later, as he went through the motions of pretending he would burn the leaf, there was no reaction whatsoever. The plant appeared to be able to differentiate between real and pretended intent. Baxter felt like running into the street and shouting into the world, "Plants can think!" Instead, he plunged into the most meticulous investigation of the phenomena in order to establish just how the plant was reacting to his thoughts and through what medium. His first move was to make sure he had not overlooked any logical explanation for the occurrence. Was there something extraordinary about the plant, about him, about the particular polygraph instrument? When he and his collaborators, using other plants and other instruments in other locations all over the country, were able to make similar observations, the matter warranted further study. More than 25 different varieties of plants and fruits were tested, including lettuce, onions, oranges, and bananas. The observations, each similar to the others, required a new view of life, with some explosive connotations for science. Heretofore, the debate between scientists and parapsychologists on the existence of ESP, or extrasensory perception, has been fierce, largely because of the difficulty of establishing unequivocally when such a phenomenon is actually occurring. The best that has been achieved so far in the field by Dr. J.B. Rhine, who initiated his experiments in ESP at Duke University, has been to establish that with human beings, the phenomenon seems to occur with greater odds than are attributable to chance. Baxter first considered his plant's capacity for picking up his intentions to be some form of ESP. Then he quarreled with the term. ESP is held to mean perception above and beyond varieties of the established 5 sensory perceptions of touch, sight, sound, smell, and taste. As plants give no evidence of eyes, ears, nose, or mouth, and as botanists since Darwin's time have never credited them with a nervous system, Baxter concluded that the perceiving sense must be more basic. This led him to hypothesize that the 5 senses in humans might be limiting factors overlying a more primary perception, possibly common to all nature. Maybe plants see better without eyes, Baxter surmised, better than humans do with them. With the 5 basic senses, humans have the choice at will of perceiving poorly, or not perceiving at all. If you don't like the looks of something, said Baxter, you can look the other way, or not look. If everyone were to be in everyone else's mind all the time, it would be chaos. To discover what his plants could sense or feel, Baxter enlarged his office and set about creating a proper scientific laboratory worthy of the space age. During the next few months, chart after chart was obtained from all sorts of plants. The phenomenon appeared to persist even if the plant leaf was detached from the plant, or if it was trimmed to the size of the electrodes. Amazingly, even if a leaf were shredded and redistributed between the electrode surfaces, there was still a reaction on the chart. The plants reacted not only to threats from human beings, but to unformulated threats, such as the sudden appearance of a dog in the room or of a person who did not wish them well. Baxter was able to demonstrate to a group at Yale that the movements of a spider in the same room with a plant wired to his equipment could cause dramatic changes in the recorded pattern generated by the plant just before the spider started to scamper away from a human attempting to restrict its movements. It seems, said Baxter, as if each of the spider's decisions to escape was being picked up by the plant, causing a reaction in the leaf. Under normal circumstances, plants may be attuned to each other, said Baxter, though when encountering animal life, they tend to pay less attention to what another plant may be up to. The last thing a plant expects is another plant to give it trouble. So long as there is animal life around, they seem to be attuned to animal life. Animals and people are mobile and could need careful monitoring. Jess, I'm just laughing at this person. Okay, how can I destroy the leaf and still have it read my mind? Where's my shredder? Oh, scientists. If a plant is threatened with overwhelming danger or damage, Baxter observed that it reacts self-defensively in a way similar to a possum, or indeed to a human being, by passing out, or going into a deep faint. The phenomenon was dramatically demonstrated one day when a physiologist from Canada came to Baxter's lab to witness the reaction of his plants. The first plant gave no response whatsoever, nor did the second, nor the third. Baxter checked his polygraph instruments and tried a fourth and fifth plant. Still no success. Finally, on the sixth, there was enough reaction to demonstrate the phenomenon. Curious to discover what could have influenced the other plants, Baxter asked, "Does any part of your work involve harming plants?" "Yes," said the physiologist. I terminate the plants I work with. I put them in the oven and roast them to attain their dry weight for my analysis. 45 minutes after the physiologist was safely on the way to the airport, each of Baxter's plants once more fluidly responded on the graph. Ooh, Jess, good question. What would plants think of plant bugs? Drift, that sounds intense, but that's just dinner. Yeah, roasting plants. This experience helped to bring Baxter to the realization that plants could intentionally be put into a faint or mesmerized by humans, that something similar could be involved in the ritual of the slaughterer before an animal is killed in the kosher manner. Communicating with the victim, the killer may tranquilize it into a quiet death, also preventing its flesh from having a residue of chemical fear, disagreeable to the palate and perhaps noxious to the consumer. This brought up the possibility that plants and succulent fruits might wish to be eaten, but only in a sort of loving ritual with a real communication between the eater and the eaten, somehow akin to the Christian rite of communion, instead of the usual heartless carnage. It may be, says Baxter, that a vegetable appreciates becoming part of another form of life rather than rotting on the ground, just as a human at death may experience relief to find himself in a higher realm of being. On one occasion, to show that plants and single cells were picking up signals through some unexplained medium of communication, Baxter provided a demonstration for the author of an article appearing in the Baltimore Sun, subsequently condensed in the Reader's Digest. Baxter hooked a galvanometer to his philodendron, then addressed the writer as if it were he who was on the meter, and interrogated him about his year of birth. Baxter named each of 7 years between 1925 and 1931, to which the reporter was instructed to answer with a uniform no. Baxter then selected from the chart the correct date, which had been indicated by the plant with an extra high flourish. The same experiment was duplicated by a professional psychiatrist, the medical director of the research ward at Rockland State Hospital in Orangeburg, New York, Dr. Aristide H. Esser. He and his collaborator, Douglas Dean, a chemist at Newark College of Engineering, experimented with a male subject who brought along a philodendron he had nursed from seedling and cared for tenderly. The two scientists attached a polygraph to the plant, and then asked the owner a series of questions to some of which he had been instructed to give false answers. The plant had no difficulty in indicating through the galvanometer the questions which were falsely answered. Dr. Esser, who at first had laughed at Baxter's claim, admitted, "I've had to eat my own words." To see if a plant could display memory, a scheme was... Okay, I think this is the part... Yeah, this is the part that, really made me flip my shit. To see if a plant could display memory, a scheme was devised whereby Baxter was to try to identify the secret killer of one of two plants. 6 of Baxter's polygraph students volunteered for the experiment, some of them veteran policemen. Blindfolded, the students drew from a hat folded slips of paper, on one of which were instructions to root up, stamp on, and thoroughly destroy one of 2 plants in the room. The criminal was to commit the crime in secret. Neither Baxter nor any of the other students was to know his identity. Only the second plant would be a witness. By attaching the surviving plant to a polygraph and parading the students one by one before it, Baxter was able to establish the culprit. Sure enough, the plants gave no reaction to 5 of the students, but caused the meter to go wild when the actual culprit approached. Baxter was careful to point out that the plant could have picked up and reflected the guilt feelings of the culprit. But as the villain had acted in the interest of science and was not particularly guilty, it left the possibility that a plant could remember and recognize the source of severe harm to its fellow. Yeah, Simply Adoran! The plant recognized the plant murderer! In another series of observations, Baxter noted that a special communion or bond of affinity appeared to be created between a plant and its keeper, unaffected by distance. With the use of synchronized stopwatches, Baxter was able to note that his plants continued to react to his thought and attention from the next room, from down the hall, even from several buildings away. Back from a 15-mile trip to New Jersey, Baxter was able to establish that his plants had perked up and shown definite and positive signs of response. Whether it was relief or welcome, he could not tell, at the very moment he had decided to return to New York. When Baxter was away on a lecture tour and talked about his initial 1966 observation, showing a slide of the original Dracena, the plant, back in his office, would show a reaction on the chart at the very time he projected the slide. Once attuned to a particular person, plants appeared to be able to maintain a link with that person no matter where he went, even among thousands of people. On New Year's Eve in New York City, Baxter went into the bedlam of Times Square armed with a notebook and stopwatch. Mingling with the crowd, he noted his various actions, such as walking, running, going underground by way of subway stairs, nearly getting run over, and having a mild fracas with a news vendor. Back at the lab, he found that each of his 3 plants, monitored independently, showed similar reactions to his slight emotional adventures. Simply Adoran, imagine being on jury duty and they put a plant on the witness stand. Drift, this is so much. It is so much. This is just the first chapter. To see if he could get a reaction from plants at a much greater distance, Baxter experimented with a female friend to establish whether her plants remained attuned to her on a 700-mile plane ride across the United States. From synchronized clocks, they found a definite reaction from the plants to the friend's emotional stress each time the plane touched down for its landing. To test a plant's reaction at still greater distances, even millions of miles, to see if space is a limit to the primary perception of his plants, Baxter would like the Marbs probes to place a plant with a galvanometer on or near the planet so as to check by telemeter the plant's reaction to emotional changes in its caretaker at ground control on Earth. Since telemetered radio or TV signals traveling via electromagnetic waves at the speed of light take between 6 and 6.5 minutes to reach Mars, and as many to return to Earth, the question was whether an emotional signal from an Earthbound human would reach Mars faster than an electromagnetic wave, or, as Baxter suspects, the very instant it was sent. Were the round-trip time for a telemetered message to be cut in half, it would indicate that mental or emotional messages operate outside time as we conceive it, and beyond the electromagnetic spectrum. We keep hearing about non-time-consuming communication from Eastern philosophic sources, says Baxter. They tell us that the universe is in balance. If it happens to go out of balance someplace, you can't wait 100 light years for the imbalance to be detected and corrected. This non-time-consuming communication, this oneness among all living things, could be the answer. Baxter has no idea what kind of energy wave may carry man's thoughts or internal feelings to a plant. He has tried to screen a plant by placing it in a Faraday cage as well as in a lead container. Neither shield appeared in any way to block or jam the communication channel linking the plant to the human being. The carrier wave equivalent, whatever it might be, Baxter concluded, must somehow operate beyond the electromagnetic spectrum. It also appeared to operate from the macrocosm down to the microcosm. One day, when Baxter happened to cut his finger and dabbed it with iodine, the plant that was being monitored on the polygraph immediately reacted, apparently to the death of some cells in Baxter's fingers. Though it might have been reacting to his emotional state at the sight of his own blood, or to the stinging of the iodine, Baxter soon found a recognizable pattern in the graph whenever a plant was witnessing the death of some living tissue. Could the plant, Baxter wondered, be sensitive on a cellular level, all the way down to the death of individual cells in its environment? On another occasion, the typical graph appeared as Baxter was preparing to eat a cup of yogurt. This puzzled him till he realized there was a chemical preservative in the jam he was mixing into the yogurt that was terminating some of the live yogurt bacilli. Another inexplicable pattern on the chart was finally explained when it was realized the plants were reacting to hot water being poured down the drain, which was killing bacteria in the sink. Oh my God, Jess, I need a Q&A session at the end or I'm just going to fill chat. We can decompress after we finish learning about plants. Baxter's medical consultant, the New Jersey cytologist Dr. Howard Miller, concluded, hi Marigold, thanks for joining, concluded that some of the cellular consciousness must be common to all life. To explore the hypothesis, Baxter found a way of attaching electrodes to infusions of all sorts of single cells, such as amoeba, paraceum, yeast, mold cultures, scrapings from the human mouth, blood, and even sperm. All were subject to being monitored on the polygraph with charts just as interesting as those produced by the plants. Sperm cells turned out to be surprisingly canny, and that they seemed to be capable of identifying and reacting to the presence of their own donor, ignoring the presence of other males. Such observations seem to imply that some sort of total memory may go down to the single cell, and by inference that the brain may be just a switching mechanism, not necessarily a memory storage organ. Sentience, says Baxter, does not seem to stop at the cellular level. It may go down to the molecular, the atomic, and even the subatomic. All sorts of things which have been conventionally considered to be inanimate may have to be reevaluated. Oh, it's Frankie! Oh my God! Oh my gosh, I can't believe you're joining after okay. So, you can hook up plants to a polygraph test, and they have reactions to different thoughts that you have. So the first example that they give is, you're like yelling at them on Twitter. The first example that they give, oh gosh, what was it? Oh, so this expert polygraph examiner hooks up a plant to his polygraph machine just on a whim and starts to see it actually having some reactions. And so his thought is, well, plants... the best way to get a reaction from someone is to threaten them, to threaten harm. And so he tries dunking a leaf in coffee, and that doesn't seem to do anything. And then he thinks, oh, well, I'll just light a leaf on fire. That's probably the most extreme thing I can do. And the moment he thinks about that, the plant starts to freak out on the polygraph test. It freaks out again when he gets up to go get the matches and follow through with his threat. And then it freaks out slightly when he actually follows through with the threat. Then he kind of thinks, well, now I'm going to pretend that I'm going to do it again. And the plant seems to be able to distinguish that this isn't a real threat and does not freak out. Probably the experiment that I got most excited about reading this for the first time was when he wanted to test if plants have memory. So there's this double-blind experiment where students of his have to interact with these two plants, and one of them picks out randomly from a hat that they are to basically throw the plant on the floor, stomp on it, completely destroy it in front of the other plant. But the scientists can't know and the other students can't know. And then each of those students walks past the two plants one by one, and the plants are totally chill with the students who just had to interact with them in a normal way. And the second the plant murderer walks past, the surviving plant flips its shit on the polygraph test. And they talk about how they could be reacting to feelings of guilt, but the perpetrator wasn't feeling particularly guilty because this was just a science experiment. Yeah, that was the coolest one. It is bonkers. Oh, hey, Pat. Snark Night. Okay. We're going to continue reading. I need to find my place. Sentience goes down to the subatomic level. Okay. Convinced of being on the track of a phenomenon of major importance to science, Baxter was anxious to publish his findings in a scientific journal so that other scientists could check his results. Scientific methodology requires that a recorded reaction be repeatable by other scientists at other locations, with an adequate number of repetitions. This made the problem more difficult than anticipated. To begin with, Baxter found that plants can quickly become so attuned to human beings that it's not always possible to obtain exactly the same reactions with different experimenters. Incidents such as the fainting, which occurred with the Canadian physiologist, sometimes made it look as if there was no such thing as the Baxter effect. Personal involvement with an experiment and even prior knowledge of the exact time an event was scheduled was often enough to tip off a plant into non-cooperation. This led Baxter to the conclusion that animals subjected to excruciating vivisection may pick up the intent of their torturers and thus produce for them the very effects required in order to end the ordeal as rapidly as possible. Baxter found that even if he and his colleagues discussed a project in their waiting room, the plants 3 rooms away could be affected by the imagery apparently generated by their conversation. To make his point, Baxter realized he would have to devise an experiment in which all human involvement was removed. The entire process would have to be automated. Altogether, it took Baxter 2.5 years and several $1,000s, some of it provided by the Parapsychology Foundation, then headed by the late Eileen Garrett, to devise the right experiment and perfect the fully automated equipment necessary to carry it out. Different scientists of varying disciplines suggested an elaborate system of experimental controls. The test Baxter finally chose was to kill live cells by an automatic mechanism at a random time when no humans were in or near the office, and see if the plants reacted. Snark Night. This sounds like Poison Ivy's origin story. Still, cool. We like Ivy in this house. We stand one Poison Ivy. As sacrificial scapegoats, Baxter hit upon brine shrimp of the variety sold as food for tropical fish. It was important to test that the victims demonstrate great vitality because it had been noted that tissue that is unhealthy or has begun to die no longer acts as a remote stimulus. Is no longer capable of transmitting some type of warning. To see that brine shrimp are in good form is easy. In normal condition, the males spend their whole time chasing and mounting females. The device for terminating these playboy creatures consisted of a small dish which would automatically tip them into a pot of boiling water. A mechanical programmer actuated the device on a randomly selected occasion so that it was impossible for Baxter or his assistants to know when the event would occur. As a control precaution against the actual mechanism of dumping registering on the charts, dishes were programmed at other times to dump plain water containing no brine shrimp. Three plants would be attached to 3 separate galvanometers in 3 separate rooms. A 4th galvanometer was to be attached to a fixed value resistor to indicate possible random variations caused by fluctuations in the power supply, or by electromagnetic disturbances occurring near or within the experiment's environment. Light and temperature would be kept uniform on all plants, which, as an extra precaution, would be brought from an outside source, passed through staging areas, and hardly handled before the experiment. Plants selected for the experiment were the Philodendron cordatum species because of its nice large leaves, firm enough to withstand comfortably the pressure of electrodes. Different plants of the same species would be used on successive test runs. The scientific hypothesis which Baxter wished to pursue was properly phrased in the vernacular of science, that there exists an as of yet undefined primary perception in plant life, that animal life termination can serve as a remotely located stimulus to demonstrate this perception capability, and that this perception facility in plants can be shown to function independently of human involvement. Oh, Bright Ann! Or Breedinan. Either way, thanks for the read. That's so sweet. Hi, everybody. We're reading a science book about plants. Plants can read your mind. Well, that's the next chapter. Right now, we're reading Plants in ESP. The experimental results showed that the plants did react strongly and synchronously to the death of the shrimp in boiling water. The automated monitoring system checked by visiting scientists showed that plants reacted consistently to the death of the shrimp in a ratio that was 5-1 against the possibility of chance. The whole procedure of the experiment and its results were written up in a scientific paper published in the winter of 1968 in Volume 10 of the International Journal of Parapsychology under the title Evidence of Primary Perception in Plant Life. It was now up to other scientists to see if they could repeat Baxter's experiment and obtain the same results. Oh, thanks for the follow, Derpanduin. Also, yes, I love that everyone, all of the folks listening to Storytime are summarizing for our new raiders. Resident Bard, Ninja Penguin AM, thank you both for the follow. More than 7,000 scientists asked for reprints of the report. On Baxter's original research. Students and scientists at some 24 American universities indicated they intended to attempt to duplicate Baxter's experiments as soon as they could obtain the necessary equipment. Foundations expressed interest in funding further experiments. The news media, which at first ignored Baxter's paper, went into a flurry of excitement over the story, once National Wildlife had the courage to take the plunge in February of 1969 with a feature article. This attracted such worldwide attention that secretaries and housewives began talking to their plants, and Dracena misangina became a household word. Bree Danan, thanks for following. Readers seemed to be most intrigued by the thought that an oak tree could actually quake at the approach of an axeman, or that a carrot could shiver at the sight of rabbits. While the editors of National Wildlife were concerned that some of the applications of Baxter's phenomenon to medical diagnosis, criminal investigation, and such fields as espionage were so fantastic that they dared not, as of yet, repeat them in print. Medical World News of March 21st, 1969, commented that, at last, ESP research might be on the verge of achieving the scientific respectability that investigators of psychic phenomena have sought in vain since 1882, when the British Society for Psychical Research was founded in Cambridge. The captions are auto-generated. We are using Web Captioner, which Jess, our mod, has shared a link for in chat. William M. Bondurant, an executive of the Mary Reynolds Babcock Foundation in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, produced a grant of $10,000 for Baxter to pursue his research, commenting, "His work indicates there may be a primary form of instantaneous communication among all living things that transcends the physical laws we know now. And that seems to warrant looking into." Baxter was thus able to invest in more expensive equipment, including electrocardiographs and electroencephalographs. These instruments, normally used for measuring electrical emissions from heart and brain, had the advantage of not putting current through the plants, merely recording the difference in potential they discharged. The cardiograph enabled Baxter to obtain readings more sensitive than the polygraph. The encephalograph gave him readings 10 times more sensitive than the cardiograph. A fortuitous occurrence led Baxter into another whole realm of research. One evening, as he was about to feed a raw egg to his Doberman Pinscher, Baxter noticed that as he cracked the egg, one of his plants attached to a polygraph reacted strenuously. The next evening, he watched again as the same thing happened. Curious to see what the egg might be feeling, I can't believe I just read that. Anyway, curious to see what the egg might be feeling, Baxter attached it to a galvanometer and was once more up to his ears in research. For 9 hours, Baxter got an active chart recording from the egg, corresponding to the rhythm of the heartbeats of the chicken embryo, the frequency being between 160 and 170 beats per minute, appropriate to an embryo 3 or 4 days along in incubation. Only the egg was store-bought, acquired at the local delicatessen, and was unfertilized. Later, breaking the egg and dissecting it, Baxter was astonished to find that it contained no physical circulatory structure of any sort to account for the pulsation. He appeared to have tapped into some sort of force field not conventionally understood with the present body of scientific knowledge. Right? Jess, Drift, Simply Adorin. Yes, like what? What? The only hint as to what sort of world he had wandered into came to Baxter from the amazing experiments in the energy fields around plants, trees, humans, and even cells carried out at the Yale Medical School in the 1930s and 40s by the late Professor Harold Saxton Burr, which are only just beginning to be recognized and understood. With these considerations, Baxter temporarily abandoned his experiments with plants to explore the implications of his egg discoveries, which appeared to have profound implications for the origin of life research and are the makings of another whole book. That is Chapter 1, Plants and ESP. Was that not wild? Oh my gosh, this is so inspiring, Snark, for a haunted greenhouse adventure. Drift. The egg had a heartbeat, but the egg was store-bought. Flashlight under the chin. This is bonkers. Okay. I kind of feel like we have time, if folks are really feeling this, to read the next chapter, which is Chapter 2, Plants Can Read Your Mind. Well, if folks want to keep learning. I'm really into this. I think I'm going to keep reading. All right. We're going to keep going. While Baxter was developing his experiments in the eastern United States, a heavy-set research chemist working with the International Business Machines in Los Gatos, California, was challenged to give a course in creativity for IBM engineers and scientists. It was only after Marcel Vogel had taken on the job that he realized the enormity of it. How does one define creativity, he found himself asking. What is a creative person? To answer these questions, Vogel, who had studied for years to become a Franciscan priest, began writing an outline for 12 two-hour seminars which he hoped would represent an ultimate challenge to his students. Vogel's own probings into the realm of creativity had started when he was a boy, curious to know what had caused the light in fireflies and glowworms. Finding little on luminescence in the libraries, Vogel informed his mother that he would write a book on the subject. 10 years later, luminescence in liquids and solids and their practical application was published by Vogel in collaboration with Chicago University's Dr. Peter Pringsheim. 2 years after that, Vogel incorporated his own company called Vogel Luminescence in San Francisco, which became a leader in the field. Over a period of 15 years, Vogel's firm developed a variety of new products: the red seen on television screens, fluorescent crayons, tags for insecticides, a blacklight inspection kit to determine from their urine the secret trackways of rodents in cellars, sewers, and slums, and the psychedelic colors popular in New Age posters. By the mid-1950s, Vogel became bored with his day-to-day tasks of administering a company and sold it to go to work for IBM. There, he was able to devote his full time to research, delving into magnetics, optic-electrical devices, and liquid crystal systems, developing and patenting inventions of crucial significance to the storage of information in computers, and winning awards which adorn the walls of his San Jose home. The turning point in the creativity course which Vogel was asked to give at IBM came when one of his students gave him an Argosy magazine with an article on Baxter's work entitled, "Do Plants Have Emotions?" Vogel's first reaction was to throw the article into the wastebasket, convinced that Baxter was just another charlatan unworthy of serious consideration. Yet, something about the idea gnawed at his mind. A few days later, Vogel retrieved the article and completely reversed his opinion. A scientist that's so into their science experiments with plants, they're part plant. I would love if, as I'm reading, chat just writes a amazing D&D encounter. The article, read aloud to his seminar students, aroused both derision and curiosity. Out of this ruckus came the unanimous decision to experiment with plants. That same evening, one student called Vogel to announce that the latest issue of Popular Electronics referred to Baxter's work and included a wiring diagram for an instrument called a psychanalyzer, which would pick up and amplify reactions from plants and could be built for less than $25. Vogel divided his class into 3 groups and challenged them to repeat some of Baxter's accomplishments. By the end of the seminar, not one of the 3 teams had achieved any success. Vogel, on the other hand, was able to report that he had duplicated certain of Baxter's results and proceeded to demonstrate how plants anticipate the act of having their leaves torn, react with even greater alarm to the threat of being burnt or uprooted, more so even than if they are actually torn, burnt, or otherwise brutalized. Vogel wondered why he alone seemed to be successful. As a boy, he had been interested in anything which might explain the workings of the human mind. After dipping into books on magic, spiritualism, and hypnotic technique, he'd given stage demonstrations as a teenage hypnotist. Vogel just gets cooler and cooler. What particularly fascinated Vogel were Mesmer's theories of a universal fluid whose equilibrium or disturbance explained health or disease. Coué's idea of autosuggestion as they related to painless childbirth and self-betterment, and the postulates of various writers on psychic energy, a term popularized by Carl Jung, who, though he differentiated it from physical energy, believed it to be incommensurable. Long words. Vogel reasoned that if there were a psychic energy, it must, like other forms of energy, be storable. But in what? Staring at the many chemicals on the shelves of his IBM laboratory, Vogel wondered which of them could be used to store this energy. In his dilemma, he asked a spiritually gifted friend, Vivian Wiley, who went through the chemicals laid out for her and said that, in her judgment, none offered any promise of a solution for Vogel's problem. Vogel suggested she ignore his preconceived ideas about chemicals and use anything which might intuitively occur to her. Back in her garden, Vivian Wiley picked 2 leaves from a saxifrage, one of which she placed on a bedside table, the other in the living room. Each day when I get up, she told Vogel, I will look at the leaf by my bed and will that it continue to live. But I will pay no attention to the other. We'll see what happens. A month later, she asked Vogel to come to her house and bring a camera to photograph the leaves. Vogel could hardly believe what he saw. The leaf to which his friend had paid no attention was flaccid, turning brown, and beginning to decay. The leaf on which she had focused daily attention was radiantly vital and green, just as if it had been freshly plucked from the garden. Some power appeared to be defying natural law, keeping the leaf in a healthy state. Curious to see if he could get the same results as his friend, Vogel picked 3 leaves from an elm outside his IBM laboratory. At home, he laid them on a plate of glass near his bed. Each day before breakfast, Vogel stared concentratedly at the 2 outer leaves on the glass for about 1 minute, exhorting them lovingly to continue to live. The center leaf he assiduously ignored. Oh, thanks for the follow. It's McBoots42. Oh, Ninja Penguin, this is making you sad about your gladiola. Oh, well, I think I have some gladiolas which have been doing well. Oh, also thank you for the hosts, McBoots. I suppose you've seen your gladiola the whole season, but it also might be that they're kind of on the out season-wise after they've made their 1 flower a year. The problem is by the time they discover plants of emotions, they've turned half of them into serial killers. I know, I feel so sad for the middle leaf. Let's see. And the center leaf he assiduously ignored. In a week, the center leaf had turned brown and shriveled. The outer leaves were still green and healthy looking. Most interesting to Vogel, the severed stems of the live leaves appear to have healed the wounds caused by being ripped from the tree. Vivian Wiley continued her experiments and later showed Vogel the saxifrage leaf which she had kept green and alive for 2 long months, while the control leaf was completely dehydrated and brown. Vogel was convinced that he was witnessing the power of psychic energy in action. If the power of the mind could keep a leaf green way past its time, Vogel wondered what its effect might be on liquid crystals, an intensive study of which he was pursuing for IBM. Trained in microscopy, Vogel had taken hundreds of color slides of liquid crystal behavior magnified up to 300 times. When screened, they rival the works of gifted abstract artists. While making the slides, Vogel realized that by relaxing his mind, he could sense activity not visually revealed in the microscopic field. What? I began to pick up things in the microscopic, which eluded others, not with ocular vision, but with my mind's eye. After becoming aware of them, says Vogel, I was led by some form of higher sensory awareness to adjust the lighting conditions to allow these phenomena to be optically recordable to the human eye or to a camera. Illithids controlling druids in a horror greenhouse. Whoa. Okay. The conclusion at which Vogel arrived is that crystals are brought into a pure or physical state of existence by preforms, or ghost images of pure energy which anticipate the solids. Since plants could pick up intentions from a human, that of burning them, for example, there was no doubt in Vogel's mind that the intent produced some kind of energy field. By the fall of 1971, finding that his microscopic work was taking up most of his time, Vogel abandoned his research on plants. But when an article on this research quoting Dr. Gina Surminara, a psychologist and author of the popular book on the seer Edgar Cayce, appeared in the San Jose Mercury. Oh, thanks for gifting Frankie a sub. Enjoy your Jarmathy emotes. Was wired by the Associated Press throughout the world, Vogel was besieged on the telephone for information and was thus stimulated to continue. Vogel realized that before he could observe with precision the effects on plants of human thoughts and emotion, he would have to improve his technique of affixing electrodes to the plant leaves in such a way as to eliminate random electromagnetic frequencies, such as the hum of nearby vacuum cleaners, major sources of spurious data, or engineer's noise, which had caused the pen recorder to drift on the chart and which obliged Baxter to conduct most of experiments between midnight and dawn. Vogel also found that some of the philodendrons he worked with responded faster, others more slowly, some very distinctly, others less distinctly, and that not only plants but their individual leaves had their own unique personality and individuality. Leaves with a large electrical resistance were especially difficult to work with. Fleshy leaves with a high water content were the best. Plants appeared to go through phases of activity and inactivity, full of response at certain times of the day, or days of the month, sluggish or morose at other times. To make sure that none of these recording effects was the result of faulty electroding, Vogel developed a mucousy substance composed of a solution of agar with a thickener of kerry gum and salt. This paste he brushed onto the leaves before gently applying carefully polished 1 by 1.5 inch stainless steel electrodes. When the agar jelly hardened around the edge of the electronic pickups, it sealed their faces into a moist interior, virtually eliminating all the variability in signal output caused by pressure on leaves when clamped between ordinary electrodes. This system produced for Vogel a baseline on the chart that was perfectly straight, without oscillations. Having eliminated random influences, Vogel began a new round of experiments in the spring of 1971 to see if he could establish the exact moment when a philodendron entered into recordable communication with a human being. With a philodendron attached to a galvanometer which produced a straight baseline, Vogel stood before the plant, completely relaxed, breathing deeply and almost touching it with outspread fingers. At the same time, he began to shower the plant with the same kind of affectionate emotion he would flow to a friend. Each time he did this, a series of ascending oscillations was described on the chart by the penholder. At the same time, Vogel could tangibly feel on the palms of his hands an outpouring from the plant of some sort of energy. After 3 to 5 minutes, further release of emotion on Vogel's part evoked no further action from the plant, which seemed to have discharged all its energy in response to his ministrations. To Vogel, the interreaction between himself and the philodendron appeared to be on the same order as that evoked when lovers or close friends meet. The intensity of mutual response evoking a surge of energy until it is finally expended and must be recharged. Like lovers, both Vogel and the plant appeared to remain suffused with joy and contentment. In a botanical nursery, Vogel found that he could easily pick out a particularly sensitive plant by running his hand over a group until he felt a slight cooling sensation, followed by what he describes as a series of electrical pulses, indicating a powerful field. Increasing the distance between himself and the plant, Vogel found, like Baxter, that he could get a similar reaction from it. First, from outside the house, then from down the block, and even from his laboratory in Los Gatos, 8 miles away. In another experiment, Vogel wired 2 plants to the same recording machine and snipped a leaf from the first plant. The second plant responded to the hurt being inflicted on its neighbor, but only when Vogel was paying attention to it. If Vogel cut off a leaf while ignoring the second plant, the response was lacking. It was as if Vogel and the plants were lovers on a park bench, oblivious of passers-by until the attention of one lover became distracted from the other. There's a lot of comparisons to Vogel and plants to a romantic relationship. From his own experience, Vogel knew that the masters of the art of yoga and teachers of other forms of deep meditation, such as Zen, are unaware of disturbing influences around them when in meditative states. An electroencephalograph picks up from them quite a different set of brain waves than when the same persons are alerted to the everyday world around them. It became clear to Vogel that a certain focused state of consciousness on his part seemed to become an integral and balancing part of the circuitry required to monitor his plants. A plant could be awakened from somnolence to sensitivity by his giving up his normal conscious state and focusing a seemingly extra-conscious part of his mind on the exact notion that the plant be happy and feel loved, that it be blessed with healthy growth. In this way, man and plant seem to interact and as a unit pick up sensations from events or third parties, which became recordable through the plant. The process of sensitizing both himself and the plant, Vogel found, could take only a few minutes or up to half an hour. This guy is like the Casanova of plants. Jess, it's as if Vogel and the plants were lovers on a park bench. I bet is not a sentence any of us thought we'd get to hear today. But what a joy. What a gift. Asked to describe the process in detail, Vogel said that first he quiets the sensory responses of his body organs. Then he becomes aware of an energetic relationship between the plant and himself. When a state of balance between the bioelectrical potential of both the plant and himself is achieved, the plant is no longer sensitive to noise, temperature, the normal electrical fields surrounding it, or other plants. It responds only to Vogel, who has effectively attuned himself to it, or perhaps simply hypnotizes it. Vogel now felt confident enough to accept an invitation to make a public demonstration with a plant. On a local TV program in San Francisco, the plant coupled to a pen recorder gave a live illustration of varying states of Vogel's mind, running from irritation at an interviewer's question to quiet tracings established when Vogel was in harmonious intercommunication with the plant. For the producers of ABC's television program, You Asked For It, Vogel also demonstrated the plant's response to his or another person's thoughts, including a sudden release of strong emotion on command, followed by the act of his quieting the plant to normal reactions to its environment. Invited to lecture to audiences who had heard of his experiments, Vogel said unequivocally, "It is fact. Man can and does communicate with plant life. Plants are living objects, sensitive, rooted in space. They may be blind, deaf, and dumb in the human sense, but there is no doubt in my mind that they are extremely sensitive instruments for measuring man's emotion. They radiate energy forces that are beneficial to man. One can feel these forces. They feed into one's own force field, which in turn feeds back energy to the plant. The American Indians, says Vogel, were keenly aware of these faculties. When in need, they would go into the woods. With their arms extended, they would place their backs to a pine tree in order to replenish themselves with its power." Yeah, Frankie, hell yeah, plants! When Vogel began to demonstrate plant sensitivity to states of attention, different from the supposed awareness which most humans like to call consciousness, he discovered that the reaction of skeptics or hostile observers could produce strange effects on him. By paying attention to negative attitudes emanating from an audience, Vogel found he could isolate the individuals emitting them and counter their effects with a deep breath, learned in yoga instruction. He would then switch his mind to another mental image, just as if he were turning a dial to a different setting. This feeling of hostility, of negativity in an audience, says Vogel, is one of the main barriers to effective communication. To counteract this force is one of the most difficult tasks in public demonstration of these plant experiments. If one cannot do this, the plant and therefore the equipment will go dead, and there is no response until a positive tie can be re-established. It seems, he says, that as I act as a filtering system which limits the response of a plant to the outside environment, I can turn it off or on, so that people and plant become mutually responsive. By charging the plant with some energy within me, I can cause the plant to build up a sensitivity for this kind of work. It is extremely important that one understand that the plant's response is, in my opinion, not that of an intelligence in plant form, but that the plant becomes an extension of oneself. One can then interact with the bioelectric field of the plant or through it, and with the thought process and emotions in a third person. Vogel concluded that a life force or cosmic energy surrounding all living things is shareable among plants, animals, and humans. Through such sharing, a person and a plant become one. This oneness is what makes possible a mutual sensitivity, allowing plant and man not only to intercommunicate, but to record these communications via the plant on a recording chart. Because his observations indicated there was an intercharge, even a commingling or fusion of energies when plant and man commune, Vogel wondered whether an exceptionally sensitive individual could get into a plant, as was reported by the 16th century German mystic Jacob Boehme? I don't know. Boehme. How do you think you say that? We're just going to say Boehme, who, as a young man, became illumined and described being able to see in another dimension. Boehme said he could look at a growing plant and suddenly, by willing to do so, mingle with that plant, be part of that plant, feel its life struggling toward the light. He said he was able to share the simple ambitions of the plant and rejoice with a joyously growing leaf. Hi, Tyler. Thanks for joining. We are learning about plants and the oneness of the universe. One day, Vogel was visited in San Jose by Debbie Sapp, a quiet, self-effacing girl who impressed Vogel with her initial ability to enter into instant rapport with his philodendron, as established by his instrumentation. When the plant was entirely calm, he asked her point blank, "Can you get into that plant?" Debbie nodded assent, and her face took on an attitude of quiet repose, of detachment, as if she were far away in another universe. Immediately, the recording pen began to trace a pattern of undulations, revealing to Vogel that the plant was receiving an unusual amount of energy. Debbie later described what happened in writing. Mr. Vogel asked me to relax and project myself into the philodendron. Several things took place as I began to carry out his request. So, matter of fact, I could just project into this plant. That's what I did. Let's move on from that. We don't have to mingle on that. Yes, we have a philodendron right here. Super one with the universe. First, I wondered exactly how I could get inside a plant. I made a conscious decision to let my imagination take over and found myself entering the main stem through a doorway at its base. Once inside, I saw the moving cells and water traveling upward toward the stem and let myself move with this upward flow. Approaching the spreading leaves in my imagination, I could feel myself being drawn from an imaginary world into a realm over which I had no control. There were no mental pictures, but rather a feeling that I was becoming part of and filling out a broad, expansive surface. This seemed to me to be describable only as pure consciousness. I felt acceptance and positive protection by the plant. There was no sense of time, just a feeling of unity in existence, in space. I smiled spontaneously and let myself be one with the plant. Then Mr. Vogel asked me to relax. When he said this, I realized I was very tired, but peaceful. All of my energy had been with the plant. Vogel, who was observing the recording on the chart, noticed an abrupt stop when the girl came out of the plant. On later occasions, when the girl re-entered the plant, she was able to describe the inner makeup of its cells and their structure in detail. She specifically noted that one of the leaves had been badly burned by an electrode. When Vogel detached the electrode, he found a hole almost all the way through the leaf. Vogel had since tried the same experiment with dozens of other people, having them go into a single leaf and look at the individual cells within. All gave consistent descriptions of various parts of the cellular body down to the detailed organization of the DNA molecules. From the experiment, Vogel came to the conclusion, we can move into individual cells in our own bodies, and depending on our state of mind, affect them in various ways. One day, this may explain the cause of disease. The ability to go into a plant and analyze what part of it is hurt was demonstrated on TV film on Good Friday, 1973, when Vogel and Dr. Tom Mantelbono, who had been working with him for over a year, were filmed during plant experimentation by a TV production team from CBS. It was highly embarrassing to both researchers that the plant seemed not to respond. Vogel asked Mantelbono to see if there was something wrong with the electroding. Instead of tampering with the electrodes, Mantelbono, to the astonishment of the CBS technicians, sat where he was and after a moment's concentration announced that the damaged cells in the upper right-hand corner of the electroded part of the leaf were shorting the electrical circuit. In the presence of the TV men, the electrodes were removed and the leaf was found to be damaged, exactly where Mantelbono had said. What? Because Vogel knows that among all humans, children are the most open-minded, he's begun to teach children how to interact with plants. First, he asks them to feel a leaf, describe its temperature, consistency, the texture, and detail. Next, he lets them bend leaves and become aware of their resilience before going on to pet the leaves gently by stroking their upper and undersides. If his pupils take pleasure in describing to him the sensations they feel, Vogel asks them to take their hands away from the leaves and try to feel a force or energy emanating from them. Many of the children instantly describe a rippling or tingling sensation. Vogel noticed that those children who felt the strongest sensations were wholly engrossed in what they were doing. Once they felt the tingling, he would say, "Now completely relax and feel the give and take of the energy. When you feel it pulsing, gently move your hand up and down over the leaf." Following his directions, the young experimenters could easily see that when they brought their hands down, the leaves fell away. By continued repetition of this motion, the leaves would begin to oscillate. With the use of both hands, the experimenters could actually get a plant to sway. As they gained confidence, Vogel urged them to move further and further away from the plant. Aw, Ninja, thanks for joining for a bit and learning about plants with us. This is basic training, says Vogel, to develop an expanded awareness of a force which is not visible. The awareness established, they see they can operate with this force. Adults, according to Vogel, are much less successful than children, which leads him to surmise that many scientists are not going to be able to repeat his or Baxter's experiments in laboratories. If they approach the experimentation in a mechanistic way, says Vogel, and don't enter into mutual communication with their plants and treat them as friends, they will fail. It is essential to have an open mind that eliminates all preconceptions before beginning experiments. Indeed, Vogel was told by one doctor working at the California Psychical Society that he had not had a single result, though he had worked for months. The same is true for one of Denver's most renowned psychoanalysts. Hundreds of laboratory workers around the world, says Vogel, are going to be just as frustrated and disappointed as these men until they appreciate that the empathy between plant and human is the key, and learn how to establish it. No amount of checking in laboratories is going to prove a thing until the experiments are done properly trained observers. Spiritual development is indispensable, but this runs counter to the philosophy of many scientists who do not realize that creative experimentation means that the experimenters must become part of their experiments. This highlights the difference in approach between Vogel and Baxter, indicating perhaps that Vogel is establishing a type of hypnotic control over his plants, whereas Baxter says that his plants, left strictly alone, will quite normally react to their environment. Vogel says that even when a person can affect a plant, the result is not always a happy one. He asked one of his friends, a clinical psychologist who had come to see him to see for himself if there were any truth to the plant research, to project a strong emotion to a philodendron 15 feet away. The plant surged into an instantaneous and intense reaction and then suddenly went dead. When Vogel asked the psychologist what had gone through his mind, the man answered that he had mentally compared Vogel's plant with his own philodendron at home, and thought how inferior Vogel's was to his. What a jerk! Oh my gosh. Snark, he must become one of the experiments. Vogel was never seen again. Who would think such a mean thought to a plant or even a person? That is not a fun plant friend. The feelings of Vogel's plant were evidently so badly hurt that it refused to respond for the rest of the day. In fact, it sulked for almost 2 weeks. Vogel could not doubt that plants have a definite aversion to certain humans, or more exactly, to what those humans are thinking. This being true, Vogel considered it possible one day to read a person's thoughts through a plant. Something of the sort had already taken place. Vogel had asked a nuclear physicist to mentally work on a technical problem. As the man was cogitating, Vogel's plant registered a series of tracings on the recorder for 118 seconds. When the tracing fell back to baseline, Vogel informed his scientist friend that he had stopped his train of thought. The friend corroborated. Vogel wondered if he had actually captured a process on a chart via a plant. After a few minutes, he asked the physicist to think of his wife. When the physicist did so, the plant again recorded a tracing, this time for 105 seconds. It seemed to Vogel that right before him in his living room, a plant was picking up and passing on a man's mental impressions of his wife. If one could interpret such tracings, could one not know what the man was thinking? After a break for a cup of coffee, Vogel almost casually asked his friend to think once more of his wife in the same way he had thought of her before. The plant registered another 105-second-long tracing very similar to the first. To Vogel, this was the first time a plant seemed to have recorded a similar thought spectrogram and duplicated it. By pursuing such experiments, says Vogel, we may have a means of technically identifying energies coming from the human mind, translating them, and feeding them back into an as-of-yet undeveloped device. A whole evening of thinking may be made explicit. Entertaining a group of skeptical psychologists, medical doctors, and computer programmers at his house, Vogel let them look over his equipment for hidden devices and gimmicks, which they insisted must exist, then asked them to sit in a circle and talk so as to see what reactions the plants might pick up on. For an hour, the group conversed on several topics, with hardly a response from the plant. Just as they had all concluded that the whole thing was fake, one of them said, "How about sex?" To their mutual surprise, the plant came to life, the pen recorder oscillating wildly on the chart. This led to speculation that talking of sex could stir up in the atmosphere some sort of sexual energy, such as the orgone discovered and described by Dr. Wilhelm Reich, and that the ancient fertility rites in which humans had sexual intercourse in freshly seeded fields might indeed have stimulated plants to grow. The plant also responded to spooky stories told in darkened rooms lit only by a red-shaded candle. At certain points in a story, such as the door of the mysterious cabin in the forest began to slowly open, or suddenly there appeared around the corner a strange man with a knife in his hand, or Charles bent down and raised the lid of the coffin. The plant seemed to pay closer attention. To Vogel, this was evidence that a plant can measure figments of the imagination being converted to energy by the group as a whole. Dr. Hal Puthoff, a physicist in the Stanford Research Institute in Palo Alto, invited Vogel and 5 other scientists to witness the effects he was getting by hooking up a chicken egg to the electropsychometer, or E-meter, developed by L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology. Oh my gosh, Jess! Jess called it at the beginning. This is a plant Scientology book. The E-meter's function is almost identical to that of the psychoanalyzer which Vogel had first used with his seminar students. Puthoff attempted to demonstrate that the egg wired to the E-meter would respond when another egg was broken. He broke 3 separate eggs, but nothing happened. After asking Puthoff if he could try, Vogel put his hand over an egg and related to it exactly as he had learned to relate to his plants. In 1 minute, the needle on the E-meter's galvanometer dial began to move and finally pinned. Oh, something's happening upstairs. I don't know if folks can hear it. Dusty went and got us someone's used stove that they don't need anymore, and we do need And I think it just arrived. So if there's clinks and clonks, if it's too much, let me know. Otherwise, I won't make adjustments to my mic. Vogel backed 10 feet away and got gyrations from the needle by opening and closing his hands. Though Puthoff and several others present tried to do the same, all failed. Jess, it's not a stove, it's the plants. Check on Dusty. The needle's movements, once thought to be affected by resistance on the skin of humans attached to electrodes, is known as galvanic skin response, or GSR. Some plants have no skin in the human sense. The term for the effect on plants has been changed to psychogalvanic response, or PGR. The PGR, says Vogel, exists not only in plants, but in all living forms. The directive action of the mind focuses the energy, and on command releases the force in a series of pulses. Oh, Frankie, thanks for following. Which can pass through glass, metals, and other materials. No one yet knows exactly what they are. In Russia, a psychic called Nina Kulagina, what a cool name, Nina Kulagina can turn the needle of a compass without touching it, but she has to do it with her hands near the compass. More impressive feats have been demonstrated at Stanford University, especially by the remarkably sensitive Ingo Swann, who attributes his success to techniques he's learned in Scientology. Again, plant Scientology book. With nothing but his willpower, Swann has been able to effect a mechanism at the university's most thoroughly shielded quark chamber, buried deep underground in a vault of liquid helium, impenetrable to any known wavelength of the electromagnetic spectrum, astonishing the academic physicists who watched him perform what they considered to be an impossible feat. Vogel stresses that experiments with plants can be extremely dangerous to those who do not have the ability to properly alter their states of consciousness. Focused thought, says Vogel, can exert a tremendous effect on the body of a person in a higher mental state, if he lets his emotions interfere. No one, says Vogel, who is not in sound bodily health should become involved with plants or any other kinds of psychic research. Though he has not been able to prove it, Vogel feels that a special diet of vegetables, fruits, and nuts, rich in minerals and proteins, allows the body to build the kind of energy necessary for such work. One draws energy at high levels, he said, and this requires good nutrition. Asked how the higher energies, such as thought, might operate on the physical body of living organisms, Vogel says he has now begun to speculate on the strange properties of water. As a crystallographer, he is interested in the fact that, unlike most salts, which have one crystalline form, coarse samples of glacier ice have more than 30 different forms. Uninitiated persons, when first looking at them, says Vogel, could conclude that they were observing as many different substances, and they would be right in their own way, because water is a real mystery. Vogel makes the prediction, which he stresses is as yet far from established fact, that since living things all have a higher water content, the vitality of a person must be in some way related to the rate of respiration. As water moves around the body and through its pores, charges are built. Vogel's first clue about his postulate on water came from the fact that some psychics have lost several pounds of body weight during sessions in which they expended vital or psychic energy. If we could weigh a person during psychic research on a sensitive scale, suggests Vogel, we would find that there is a loss of weight in each case. It is water loss, as it is in persons who go on crash diets. Whatever the future brings, Vogel believes that his research with plants can help man to recognize to the recognition of long-ignored truths. By developing simple training kits, which he is presently designing, he thinks he can teach children to release their emotions and watch the effects in a measurable way. They can thus learn the art of loving, says Vogel, and know truly that when they think a thought, they release a tremendous power or force in space. By knowing that they are their thoughts, they will know how to use thinking to achieve spiritual, emotional, and intellectual growth. This is no machine to measure brainwaves or any gimmick to help people to become seers or mystics, Vogel insists, but one to help children to become simple, honest human beings. Asked to sum up the importance of research with plants, Vogel replied, "So much of the ills and suffering in life comes from our inability to release stresses and forces within us. When a person rejects us, we rebel inside and we hold on to this rejection. This builds a stress, which, as Dr. Wilhelm Reich showed so long ago, becomes locked in as muscular tension, and if not unlocked, depletes the body's energy field and alters its chemistry. My research with plants indicates one pathway to deliverance. For Marcel Vogel, plants have opened new horizons. The vegetal kingdom seems capable of picking up messages of intent, benign or malicious, that are inherently more truthful than when translated into words. A talent which all human beings may share, but which they have momentarily occluded. Two young Californian students of humanistic psychology and Hindu philosophy, Randall Fontes and Robert Swanson, have now pursued Vogel's quarry into unbeaten ground. Using sophisticated equipment lent them by the IBM researcher, they have made a series of discoveries so surprising that despite their youth, they have been granted funds and equipment by established universities to further probe the mysteries of plant communication. Fonts and Swanson's first discovery came virtually by accident when no one noticed that the other yawning was being picked up by a plant in the form of energy surges. Instead of ignoring the phenomenon as improbable, the two students followed up the clue, remembering that in ancient Hindu texts, an exaggerated yawn was considered a means by which a tired person could be recharged with vivifying Shakti, a postulated energy filling the universe. With the help of Dr. Norman Goldstein, a professor of biology at State University in Hayward, California, Fonts went on to discover an electrical potential traveling from cell to cell in the ivy philodendron, which gives a strong indication of the presence of hitherto unsuspected simple nervous system. As a result, Fonts has been invited to direct a project at the Science Unlimited Research Foundation in San Antonio, Texas, on the effects of human consciousness on living organisms. Meanwhile, Swanson is cooperating in the setting of a parapsychologically oriented counseling center at the John F. Kennedy University in Martinez, California, where one of Swanson's goals is to determine just which people affect plants telepathically and which do not. Simply Adorin, thanks for sticking around. That is the end of chapter 2 of, I ended up taking off the flappy flap. But that was the end of chapter 2, The Secret Life of Plants. Ooze, hello. Thank you for joining us. Woo, that was a lot. I'm going to pause there, but I would love to chit chat with folks who've been tuning in to Storytime. Which parts blew your mind the most? What questions do you have? I don't have answers, but I would like to know your questions. You did arrive at the end, Ooze. But let's relive some of this amazing plant knowledge. Okay, group plant psychic session now. Yeah, especially where Vogel was talking about how he teaches children who are so open-minded. They don't have all these preconceived notions that and baggage that they're holding. How he teaches them to interact with plants and use their energies to make plants sway. I kind of, not gonna lie, I kind of want to try that with my plants. Yeah, Frankie. And I totally want to get 2 or 3 leaves and see if I just channel loving, living energy to one of them, how long I can maintain that over another. Jess says, question, the plant bugs thing. Do plants view them as not a threat? Are they possibly a threat because they're technically animals? I feel like because for ooze, a lot of the experiments we read about in the book attach galvanometers to plants, so lie detectors to plants, and can read emotional responses from them. And they seem to respond to perceived possible threats. So a dog entering a room. One experiment talked about a spider being in the room and the plant not knowing what the spider is planning on doing, reacting until the spider walks away. And so Jess is wondering how they would react to a plant bug, like a stick bug or a leaf bug. I feel like because it talks so much about plants not relying on the typical 5 senses, but some sort of more basic sense, I think that I don't know if it necessarily registers to them that a stick bug or a leaf bug looks like them. I think they would register it as a little animal. I am not a scientist or an expert in any way. That is just my thought. Frankie says, I used to tell my mom crystals made me feel exactly how he was talking about plants and kids. Yeah, I used to feel that way a lot when I was really young. Certain crystals, you almost sort of feel like a vibrating energy coming from them. Oh, your mom is a botanist. Cool. For the plant murderer thing and cutting a leaf thing, how would it identify something that's equivalent of a haircut versus actually destroying it? That's a really good question, because they talked about how, again, I'm going to summarize this for ooze. So one of the first experiments, they hooked up the galvanometer to the plant and they were trying to get emotional responses. And one way to do that is to threaten harm. And the moment the person thought of burning one of the leaves, the plant started to react, and then reacted really strongly again when they got up to act on that threat and go get some matches. And then didn't react as much when they actually carried out the threat. Maybe the plant was like, oh, okay, that's not so bad. Which sounds like something I would do. And then when they thought about, well, I'm just going to think about burning it and see if that gets a reaction, the plant seemed to be able to tell, oh, they're not actually going to do this. They don't have any intention. So bringing that back to the question Jess had, I feel like if the plant knows that you don't have a harmful intention, I feel like it wouldn't react as strongly. It might have a small reaction. Like he talks about how when he actually burnt the leaf, it did react a little bit, but not as much as when it perceived that there was a threat. So I feel like they would understand your intentions. Like if you need to trim back a plant, I don't think it would be as upset. Yeah, and Frankie says that like cutting dead leaf tissue seems to probably wouldn't react the same as if you were cutting live tissue either. They even mentioned that plants will react to cells or organisms dying in their environment. But they needed the brine shrimp in their experiment, their controlled experiment, to be really healthy, because plants don't always react to something that is diseased or already dead. So that kind of makes sense, where if you're trimming back dead leaves or branches, they also would not react as much. Jess has so many questions. What about the ones that you can make a whole new plant from a clipping? Is the plant like, oh, okay, you're going to make a child of mine now? Or is it like, ow, you cut off a limb? Frankie says, I personally assume it's still traumatic because it has to seal the wound. I feel like it probably has some sort of negative or traumatic reaction to it. But again, I feel like the plant seemed to react almost more to intentions, sort of that ESP reading mind thing, than actual actions. That I feel like if there aren't harmful intentions, it might not be as traumatic as someone coming up to a plant and being like, well, I'm going to push you over and stomp on you. The plant seemed very upset about that. But gosh, I forgot. Because I read this like 8 years ago. This book is so heckin' interesting. The first chapter is my favorite because it deals with a lot of these like really fantastical chapters and experiments that you never hear about in like that aren't really taught in biology class, that plants can read your mind or any of that. But later there's chapters about I'm totally blanking. There's that one guy who did like a million amazing things with peanuts. I think he has a whole chapter in here, but it's like different experiments than we're used to hearing about, like not just like peanut butter. Ooh, part 3 is tuned to the music of the spheres, and there's a chapter called The Mystery of Plant and Human Auras. I'm probably going to not read every chapter out loud, but just reread this just for myself personally being interested in reading it. And then my favorite chapters, if folks seem pretty interested in this stuff, I might read those. Excuse me. Oh, Frankie says, that makes me feel so much better. I apologize to all my plants every time I prune them. Anytime I interact with my plants the last 8 years since reading this book, I just think really loving thoughts. And I have a lot of houseplants, and I like to concentrate them in one room. So sometimes I just like walking into the room, and after I've freshly watered everything, just like being in that room, and I feel like I can sense just like a really happy, satisfied energy from everybody. All my plant friends. Yeah, thanks, Jess. Yeah, if you're really enjoying The Secret Life of Plants, sorry, I've got like a weird dry itch in my throat. Hold on, I'm gonna mute myself, then I'm gonna cough. I just feel self-conscious like coughing in everybody's ear. All right. Whew. Okay, better. Oh, Snark Night, a seed? No, not a seed in my throat. Oh. But Jess, yes, thank you for playing Frankie's podcast. If you enjoyed The Secret Life of Plants, then you'd probably enjoy a whole plant podcast. So check out Propagated. Oh, now we're just getting plant questions. And we've got the Propagated host in the chat. Frankie might know. How do folks deal with gnats in their houseplants? I hate when my plants get like little buggies. I've read that a certain percentage of alcohol sprayed on plants can get rid of some of them, and then it evaporates and doesn't seem to have a negative effect on plants. You might want to look up by specific plant, though. I would love to come on for an episode. I kind of want to read a little bit more of this book, so I feel like I've got lots of secret plant knowledge that I can share with you. But I would love to specifically go on your podcast to squee about my favorite book. Jess says, so yeah, the thing where people's brain chemistry is the opposite of the right emotion, maybe the plant will be confused. Yeah, it was interesting. I wonder if folks who say that they have the opposite of a green thumb, if they just have that, like, not the right energy for plants in a very real way. Frankie also gives advice that neem oil works, but it's expensive. You should water less and make sure your plants are in trays that have rocks so it's not sitting in water. Good advice. All right. The noise upstairs has quieted down, so I'm actually kind of curious to go up and see what this oven stove situation that happened is. And also, do we still have our old broken oven/stove? And so I can talk to Dusty about how we're going to get rid of that. But I'm taking a look at friends of ours who are streaming right now. And would folks be down for a raid? We have Critical Bard continuing The Last of Us Part 2. We rated Omega last time. It looks like a number of folks are playing D&D or some sort of RPG. I would love to raid Jeanette, who has tuned in a few times. That's on Twitch. She's Uncanny Adventures. And then Random Tuesday is doing art. Looks like she's doing photo editing. Does anyone have a preference on what we zoom over to next? I really enjoyed story time. So we'll see. Next time I'll either read the last TSR Choose Your Own Adventure book, or if I've read through a few chapters and found another really good one for you all, we can read more of Secret Life of Plants. This could be just like our fun plant club for the next few weeks. Tomorrow is my big move day, but I'm planning on pulling an all-nighter and packing with Dusty tonight so that tomorrow morning we can just move all our stuff in a U-Haul, get it in here. So that any luck, I will still be able to stream tomorrow as planned. I am planning to stream a new game called Roki, all based on Scandinavian folklore. It looks like a beautiful game. It is a narrative point and click. I think it'll be really fun and gentle, but also some parts that are kind of like scary and apparently emotionally devastating. I'm really looking forward to that. If you come and join live, I mean, there's always the VOD, but if you watch live, Roki actually gave me a Steam key or code. I don't know video games enough to know what it's called. A Steam key? Is that what it is? I have a Steam key I can give away. So if you're curious about the game and you want to check out what gameplay looks like and potentially win a copy of the game for yourself, we're hopefully going to be streaming that tomorrow at 5 o'clock. Thank you. It is called a Steam key. I know words. All right, with that, I think we are going to go ahead and give Jeanette's Uncanny Adventures a raid and see what RPG they are playing over there. So stick around for that. Get your raid Get your raid Jarmathy emotes ready to spam, to welcome, or to, I guess they're welcoming us. I don't know. Let's just spread some joy. And do something nice for yourself tonight. I will see you all tomorrow. Bye, Rose Buddies.